Hey everyone, and welcome to RUBIN'S Mind Lab, where we break down the latest research into what it really means. Ever wonder why some people just seem to connect better when they talk, especially with kids? Well, this new study looks into how empathy, that ability to understand and share other people's feelings, shapes how we communicate, particularly when we're talking to children. So, what if I told you that being more empathetic could make you a better communicator with kids and that it actually helps them understand you better? That is the core idea behind this fascinating research. Imagine you are watching a television show meant for children. Does the presenter's empathy make a difference in whether you, as a child, can grasp what they're saying? This study dives deep into how empathy affects communication, especially child-directed communication. You know, that special way adults often talk to children, often with a higher pitch, simpler words, and more gestures. This research wanted to see if people who are naturally more empathetic are also better at this baby talk or child. Directed language, as scientists call it. And more importantly, does this child-directed language actually help kids understand information better? The researchers had a really clever idea. They recruited people who were training to be broadcasters. Now, broadcasters have to communicate with all sorts of audiences, right? So they asked these future broadcasters to do two things. First, present some information as if they were talking to adults. And second, present the exact same information as if they were talking to children. They did this for about specific topics, referencing pictures. So they had these broadcasters talk about 4 different pictures. For each picture, they had to do one version for kids and one for adults. They recorded everything, and then they measured how empathetic the broadcasters were using a common questionnaire. After that, they analyzed everything about how they communicated their words, their tone of voice, and even their hand gestures. And here is where it got really interesting. They found that the more empathetic broadcasters were, the more they actually changed their communication style when talking to kids compared to adults. It wasn't just talking louder or faster. Higher empathy speakers used simpler words that were more common, and they referred to the audience more often. Their voices changed too, with things like higher pitch and more expressive tone. And their gestures became more frequent and more descriptive, like actually acting out what they were talking about. The less empathetic broadcasters didn't change their style as much. Think of it like this. Empathetic people are better at reading the room even when that room is filled with children. They're naturally more attuned to what their audience needs. They don't just deliver information, they try to make sure it lands. And it wasn't just about words and tone. Their gestures also showed differences. Higher empathy meant more descriptive gestures, ones that actually illustrated what they were talking about, and more pointing, which helps direct attention. They also used gestures that might help with rhythm and memory, like little hand movements that emphasize points. This is the first big takeaway. Empathy seems to make people switch gears much more effectively when talking to children. They don't just talk at kids, they talk to them, adapting their entire communication package, voice, words, and gestures to be child-friendly. But does all this adaptation actually help children understand? That is where the second experiment comes in. They took those recordings from the first experiment, the ones made by both the higher and lower empathy broadcasters, for both child-directed and adult-directed programs, and showed them to a group of children. The kids watched or listened to these clips and then had to answer questions to test how well they understood the information. And guess what they found? Children understood the child-directed programs significantly better when they were made by the higher empathy broadcasters. It was like the more empathetic broadcasters' adaptations made the information stick. But here is a crucial point. This benefit for children was almost non-existent when they watched the adult-directed programs. Even if they were made by the same empathetic person. This is super important. It means empathy doesn't just make you generally nicer when you talk. It makes you better at tailoring your communication specifically for someone else's needs. When the adaptations were right for children, they understood better. When the adaptations were for adults, even the empathetic ones, they didn't help kids as much. So, how did these adapted communication styles actually help comprehension? The researchers did something clever. They looked at whether the specific multimodal cues, the word choices, the way of speaking, the gestures explained the link between empathy and understanding. They found that yes, these specific communication features partially explained why children understood better from higher empathy broadcasters. For child-directed programs, the specific ways these broadcasters adapted their language and gestures, like using more frequent words or clearer gestures, were linked to better child comprehension. This is the so what. the really impactful part. Empathy isn't just a nice personality trait. It is a powerful tool for effective communication, especially when talking to children. It helps speakers intuitively adjust their words, their tone, and their gestures in ways that make information easier for young minds to grasp. It is like empathy gives broadcasters a special lens to see what a child needs to hear and see. And when they use that lens, they adapt their communication, their voice, their words, their gestures, in a way that makes a real difference to how well children learn. Now, what are the limitations of this study? Well, they use broadcasters, which is a specific professional group. We don't know if the same effects would hold true for everyday parents or teachers, though the principles are likely similar. Also, the study focused on comprehension of specific content. Empathy might influence other aspects of child-adult interaction, like emotional connection in different ways. But what this study does tell us is incredibly powerful. It suggests that if we want to communicate effectively with children, whether in education, media, or even at home, we should focus on being more empathetic. It's not just about being kind, it's about being a better communicator. This research opens the door to understanding how to train better communicators and, importantly, how to design media and learning environments that are truly optimized for young learners. It highlights that true understanding comes from connecting, and empathy is the bridge. So, what do you think? Does this align with your own experiences? Have you noticed how empathetic people communicate differently? Let us know in the comments below. If you found this interesting, please give this video a thumbs up. Subscribe to RUBIN'S Mind Lab for more explorations of the human mind, and hit that notification bell so you don't miss our next dive into science. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.